And to give you an idea, we took this thing from zero to 100 mil in 2 years and of being in the marketplace, and we sold for a 10x multiple. It was really, it fundamentally changed my life, right? Because now I have the luxury of practicing because I want to, not because I have to. And, there's so many things that you learn about going through an experience like this. You learn that you're far more capable of greatness than what you'll initially ever anticipate, if you're willing to stay the course. You also realize you can't do these things yourself. You need to surround yourself with team members who are.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Cam Hemphill here, your host for the Medical Millionaire podcast. Hey, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. My goal is to give incredible value and insight for practice owners. So if you're thinking about getting into the world of becoming a practice owner, you're looking to take your practice to the next level, I want to help you throughout that journey. Guys, today I have an incredible guest on. It took me over a month to get him on the show. I have Dr. Jon Marashi here. He's a world-renowned industry leader and innovator for cosmetic dentistry. Talk about the ability to build a loyal clientele, right? He has a very impressive roster of A-list actors, musicians, athletes. He's out of the Hollywood Hills area, and he has a unique, high-tech, precise, and artistic approach to cosmetic dentistry, which is garnered by some of the attention of the top media, including Vogue, GQ, Esquire, Vanity, some of the top names and brands out there. The Wall Street Journal actually even wrote a piece on him. So in addition to his private practice, he launched a signature Sonic luxury toothbrush in 2019. Dr. Marashi was also one of the founding team members that helped launch a company called Byte, a very disruptive oral healthcare brand, which was acquired in 2020. He sold it for $1 billion. So not only is he a world-renowned cosmetic dentist, not only does he change lives for his patients, he's also an exceptional entrepreneur and was able to see something compelling that could attach to his existing practice and create $1 billion exit. He's also a kick-ass skateboarder. And if you follow him on social media, you'll see that he's just one of the coolest, down-to-earth guys that I've ever met. And I'm honored to have him on the show. Jon, thank you so much for taking the time.
Morning, Cam. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So give us a little background. You've done so many cool things. Skateboarding, obviously, that had to start at an early age. Dentistry, building $1 billion empire. I mean, there's a lot to talk about. I want to jump right in. So how do you do it? How do you go from cosmetic dentistry to building $1 billion company? Talk about that journey with us if you could.
There's only two things I wanted to do my entire life. It was going to be a professional skateboarder or a dentist. That's it. That's where I was. And fortunately, the way that the cards fell was amateur skateboarder, professional dentist instead of the other way around. Probably saved me a few broken bones, that's for sure. So dentistry. Okay, I started skateboarding when I was 12. Sorry to take a left turn there. And this was about 1986. And Back to the Future had just come out, the prior year. Skateboarding was on this big wave, and I'm from Spokane, Washington, so it's not like I grew up in Southern California beach culture where it was really prominent. But the first time I saw skateboarding, the first time I got to step on a board, the first time I got to see it in a magazine, I just knew that was my calling. There was something so mesmerizing about this blend of the creativity that you could make up things and try to do things. And there was an autonomy with it as well, because I was never so much into, like the traditional team sports, and I wasn't really good at those. But I still remember my first night on my skateboard. I spent the whole summer working to save money to getting one. And it was beyond magical. That's really the only way I can describe it. Now, the funny thing is the next year when I started junior high in 7th grade, this is so vivid, this pulling this memory back. All the girls that caught my attention had braces on. And I know it sounds really weird, but in my mind, there was something about, I knew what the end product was going to be, this gorgeous smile. And I was just really intrigued by it. And that's my earliest memory of thinking like, wow, I'm attracted to smiles. I'm a tinkerer. I like working with my hands. I was a prolific Lego builder as a kid as well. And it was the first time that it dawned upon me, like, maybe I should be a dentist one day.
So how old were you when you said, when that started, happening, when you were saying, hey, you know what, maybe I should be a dentist? It's weird. I actually thought about being a dentist as I was a kid too. And it's almost like when you're talking to your parents growing up, hey, what do you want to do? What do you want to be at a certain stage of your life? A firefighter, policeman. And then it kind of goes, I want to be a doctor, dentist. That happened with me. Like, how old were you? Talk to us about that.
So, yeah, I mean, once I was in middle school, and as I mentioned about, catching my eye with folks who had orthodontics, that's kind of when I knew I was heading down that path. And I remember going to the dentist as a kid and getting my teeth cleaned. I was also really interested in the work that was being done there. I liked looking around and seeing this busy operation. And I always thought, the dentist was cool. And I was always curious. Sometimes they would hand you a mirror and you could actually watch what they were doing. So there were several things just kind of all coming together at once that said, hey, this could be a real strong possibility for me. And my love of science and working with my hands, that combined with my love of smiles, it seemed to check the most boxes, that's for sure. And it was just something that it never ended up being a fleeting thought. Like my dad told me once I wanted to be a farmer in Kentucky. I don't remember that one, but I do remember always wanting to be a dentist.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So like 2 years ago, I was hanging with my youngest daughter. She's 8 at the time. She was 6 at the time. And, she's talking about what she wanted to do when she was old. And she's like, Dad, I want to be a bus driver. And I'm like, okay, all right, let's, that's cute. Let's talk about that. And obviously I just let her fantasy, brain and where she was at, cause like school buses are cool. They're big, they're yellow. So like back to where you want to be a farm boy in Kentucky, us as parents maybe remember that. She probably won't remember that as she gets older, right? So I love that. But when you zeroed in on dentistry, I mean, very young age, obviously middle school, you never veered away from that because you're still doing smiles today and you love doing it. So as you see, a lot of people like change their mind, right? They get into dentistry, for example, or another occupation, and they quickly realize, well, this isn't for me. I thought it was for me, but maybe I don't like to be inside of people's mouths, for example, or maybe I just don't want to be at the practice, right? So as you zeroed in on that at such an early age, it just kind of continued to build off of the curiosity. Is that right? And you never veered away from it? I find that really intriguing.
Yeah, it was a one-way street for me. In fact, at that juncture, I thought I wanted to be an orthodontist because that was the only thing I knew about dentistry that would be the gateway to getting a nice-looking smile. And, I grew up in a lower middle-class household, and I didn't get to go to the dentist particularly often. And certainly there wasn't enough there for having orthodontics. And my teeth were barely good enough. They weren't a disaster, but I didn't have that beautiful straight white smile, that all the other middle school kids and high school kids. And so there was a sense of, for sure, of missing out on that. And when I got to dental school my first year, one of the first things I did was go and get braces because I was in school. And so, there was this desire of something that I wanted to have for myself as well. I think that was part of that driving force. And, very few kids are jumping at age 23 to put themselves into braces. Yeah. But it wasn't until I was in my first year of dental school where I got exposure to cosmetic dentistry, and that changed everything. I was like, wait a second, I like this orthodontic stuff, but that's actually not what I want to do. I want to do cosmetic dentistry. This is even more exciting for me.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, based upon the history, even going back to tinkering, being looking at the science, the skateboarding, like the visionary, the artistic component of it. Because I'm a big snowboarder. It was never particularly great at skateboarding. I tried it for a while, but I know for me, if I'm going down a mountain, right, double black diamond. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I skied and snowboarded some of the gnarliest terrain out there. you had to have this creative vision of how to accomplish a move, a trick, how to get down the mountain, right? And so like, as you have that visionary component, I could see where you tie the scientific component to it and then bring that to life. And I can see what you're saying from the cosmetic standpoint. So as you're going into dental school, what was that like? And like, walk us through that, because that's not easy, right? And a lot of people throughout their journey in life get to this part and they say, okay, I'm in it for a year, 2 years. Maybe it's not for me. Maybe it's too hard. What kept you going? What was some of the critical factors that kept you on track, and maybe even some that almost pulled you away?
You know, I'll start with the part that could have derailed the whole thing. It was, how rigorous the program was. And, listen, I think anyone who goes through life without adversity probably doesn't reach their potential, because it's the hard times, that build us the resilience that we need to persevere. And, I was always a good student, and getting into graduate school, it was a whole nother level. And so, aside from having to work harder, the tests were more frequent, the material was more dense, the stakes were higher, because now it wasn't just like, graduating from college with this degree and, I'll just go get some job and maybe it doesn't even relate to it. It's like, no, this is my livelihood on the line here. So the stakes were a lot higher. And in the back of my mind, I was like, look, there's a lot of people who have done this before me. And so, if other people have done it, it's doable. So I just have to stay the course. And that was my guiding light through the adversity of dental school. But there were two pivotal moments in my first year of dental school that gave me the fire to never want to give up and also head down this track or this path. The first was that it turns out that one of the professors at New York University that I went to for dental school was considered, the grandfather of cosmetic dentistry. And his name was Dr. Jon Marashi. Hey, Doc, I always give him a shout out. And he was the dentist that figured out how to get things to stick to the front of teeth. So when you talk about cosmetic dentistry and the main procedure, which I do, which is porcelain veneers, and for those of you listening, a porcelain veneer it's almost like a ceramic fingernail that bonds to the front of your tooth. And when you do these in multiple all the way across the front, now you can change the shape, size, color, position, and the overall layout of your smile. And that's what I do for a living. That's what I'm known for. And up until about 1981 or so, all the attempts were, hit and miss, because they could never get these things to predictably stick to the front of the tooth. Dr. Calamia was the guy who figured it out. And when I got my first lecture in my first year where he was talking about it and I was seeing the work that was done, I was like, oh my gosh, look at this. Well, there was another happy accident as well. I was living in the dorm. They actually had a dental dorm for the grad students. And I got a trade publication in my mailbox that was put there erroneously. It was for someone else. It's got someone else's mail. And I opened it up and I saw my first article in cosmetic dentistry in there where, veneers were done on someone. And this was on someone who already had braces. And there was this profound realization that straight teeth didn't always equal beautiful smile, because if the physical tooth itself had a poor shape or a poor color, then straighter version of it didn't give you a handsome smile. And so this case was showing start to finish, soup to nuts, how the process worked. Well, it turns out the dentist who was the author of the article that submitted the case was this famous celebrity dentist in New York City. And I was like, oh my, and I saw this article and it was so profound. I was like, okay, that's it. This is what I'm going to do. And my dental school professor was able to introduce me to this guy because they knew each other. And I said, can I please come watch in your office? And I said, I'll wash your toilets. I just want to see this being done in real life. One of the things that I've learned is that, when you're a student, it's like being a puppy dog, right? And what do people want to do with the puppy dog? They want to feed it. They want to pet it, because because you're there for the right reasons. You're not like the next door, competitor trying to steal trade secrets or whatever. So I got to go into this guy's office, and Dr. Larry Rosenthal, thanks, Larry. I'm eternally grateful to you. And man, my eyes were blown away with what I saw. It was, people flying in and famous people, and they're getting their smiles done, and they're all happy to be there. And I'm watching the work being done. And at the end of that day, you can imagine what was going on in my mind. And the doc, he was so gracious. He's like, all right, well, good luck, kid. And I'm like, well, when can I come back? I don't think he was expecting that.
Yeah.
And at that point, I kind of turned into, like Charlie Sheen on Wall Street. How he kept showing up on Gordon Gekko's door until he finally got to work for him. And that's exactly what happened. After I finished my residency and I had stayed in touch with this guy, all that time, I convinced him to hire me right out of the gate. And so when you talk about, pivotal moments in my career, that was huge to have gone from, literally being a student to working at, which at that point in time, was the number one cosmetic dentistry office, and being able to, get my reps in at such an early stage of my career.
So he was in New York and you were in California?
Yeah. No, because I went to dental school at NYU.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And my professor, the guy who basically invented cosmetic dentistry, knew this guy. And so I got an introduction from him. And that's how I got my foot in the door. But, once the guy opened the door, just a smidge, I came, kicking right through. The guy tried to close the door a couple times, just jammed my foot in the doorway.
Yeah. Were you always that way? Were you always pretty persistent? Were you always like
very much so? And I mentioned I had pretty modest home life, and we learned at a very early age, me and my brothers, that if we wanted anything, we had to figure out a way to get it. And so the picture I'm painting, like, look, we always had food on the table and like it was good. But if we wanted the extras, that was on us. So, we were always out hustling and scheming, trying to find ways to get money. And, whether it was starting out early as kids doing lemonade sales, or doing things like, trying to mow the neighbor's lawn, or trying to, shovel walkways and do gardening. I mean, everything and anything we could think of, to try to hustle, to put a few bucks in our pocket. And, we even did door-to-door sales. I'll tell you right now, there is nothing that will build more grit than doing door-to-door sales, because you get no 99% of the time, and you're sitting there trying to pitch, selling your raffle tickets, and that builds more grit, and then you go back to the same house the next day and they're like, hey, we just had you here. Yes, I said, I know, but you didn't let me finish. And that's a life lesson. Like if you're that young and you can take, or handle the rejection of it all, because most people can't, and go back and do it again with a smile on your face. I didn't realize that then that was going to mold my resilience for later in life, but it did, because at that point in time, I was doing it just out of what I thought was necessity.
Yeah. There's so much to unpack there. And, there's so much of a trend line or common thought or common interview that I have with people on the show, or entrepreneurs that I've just engaged with throughout my life, is, early on in a lot of people's journey, they have to go through experience. They have to figure things out on their own, whether it's the hard way, sometimes it's a super hard way, sometimes it's a little bit easier path. But entrepreneurs and people that build this grit, this adversity at a young age, right? And put themselves out there and are not afraid to knock on the door, and people to say, they're going to say no. I did door-to-door sales as well as a kid. I had lemonade stands. I did the whole, everything you just described. I went through all that. And, it's, it builds this armor, right? This shell around you, this strength and courage at a young age. And I think, like, as you continue to advance and challenge yourself, get smarter, build upon your career, age, you're built within this core that you can almost accomplish anything. And I think it's actually really important. So for the listeners out there, however old you are, you can still build that shell, and you almost have to reinforce that shell, because you can lose sight of who you are throughout your entrepreneurship journey, right? You're going to have failures as an entrepreneur, as a parent, as an adult. You're going to fall on your face, and you have to remember all the hard shit you went through to get yourself back to where you are and to continue to pursue your career and your journey. So what I'm saying is, I hear a lot of things that what you're expressing creates success. And it's the ability to never give up. It's the ability to say, you know what, I'm going to put my spot or myself in this position, this spot. You are in this dentistry school. You saw this article. You knew you had an in, a little bit of a potential in. It wasn't a guaranteed thing, and you went for it. And the fact that you just had that mindset, you know what? Because some people say, no, well, that guy wrote an article. He's like a big deal. No, that's way out of my league. I'm not going to go there. You didn't, right? And I think most people in this world do. They retract instead of expand. And the people that expand and say, I'm going to go for what's the worst thing I can do? I was told no to 100 times as a kid, door knocking, door to door. Let's just try it. And you put yourself out there, right? And continue to put yourself out there. And it sounds like you didn't take no for an answer. And finally, this guy's like, you know what? I'm going to give him a shot. Like, he wants it bad enough. He's here. Most people don't do that. 99% of people don't do that. He gave you a shot. You went in there. You saw their lives being changed. You saw this like wonderful moment of going from an unhappy smile to a happy smile, people happy all over the place, and you making a great career out of it. So after that journey, that experience, you work for him. When did you open up your own practice? How long did that take? How long did you work there? Talk to us about that.
So I was in that practice for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, I started thinking about, I feel like I'm getting this, but what do I want for my life? I started thinking a little more big picture, just outside of learning these clinical skills. And all roads lead to skateboarding. I still remember the first copy of Thrasher magazine that I looked at age 12 in the 6th grade. And you see this California lifestyle of people living by the beach and, like doing airs out of a swimming pool, stuff I couldn't even comprehend. But I always gravitated towards that. And even watching movies, you're like, people get to live like this. Like, you see like the beach scenes and all that. So in the back of my mind, I knew somehow, some way I was going to end up there. And I woke up one morning and I said, it's time. And I had to go sit down and have a conversation, with my then boss, and tell him that my life was going in a different direction. And it was a difficult conversation, right? Because this is the person that I felt like had helped groom me and give me this opportunity. And what happens, he was actually tremendously supportive. And he said, I hate to lose you, but, you need to follow your dream and what you want to do. So he said, you got my blessing. So my wife, who at that time was my fiance, in 30 days, we packed up and moved to California and started a whole new life. But this brought its own set of challenges. So I was riding high. I'm like, okay, I'm going to California. Just like buying like a house, and there's a real estate agent to find a house, you can do the same with businesses. For those of you listening, there's business brokers who will help you find it. And in dentistry, you have what are called practice brokers. And, the shortcut to the front of the line, the traditional path is, if you're not going to work for someone, but you want to have your own business, is you try to find someone who's winding down and retiring and wants to pass the baton. So, that's what I did. And I spent that whole summer reading books on how to buy a practice and transition and how a practice runs from a management perspective. And I found what I thought was a beautiful practice in La Jolla, California. It's in northern San Diego. It's just a really affluent area, and it looked really good. And so, fast forward a couple months and I'm at the bottom of the ninth, and a week away from closing on this practice. Diligence had been done, bank financing, security. You can imagine I'm riding high. I'm like, I can't believe this, like I'm 30 years old. I'm going to start making a lot of money and start building my empire. And a few days before it closed, my accountant calls me and he goes, we got a problem. And I'm like, what? He goes, I couldn't sleep last night. I went back. There's something that just hasn't been sitting well with me. And it turns out that the owner of that practice cooked the books royally. And he was just really good at it. And it snuck by not only my accountant, but also the underwriting people and the bank CPAs looking at all the financials. And I mean, I could go down, it doesn't even really matter what the guy was doing, but he was a crook is the bottom line. And I'm like, well, holy shit, you know, I can't buy this thing. Like, what else has he, you know, done fraudulently?
Right.
So, you know, here I was, I kind of bet the farm on, you know, doing this thing. And then it just all of a sudden went to zero. I'm like, oh boy, what am I going to do now? You know, because, a good practice being available to purchase is not like something that's on demand. You know, there's just a lot of timing available. I went from like thinking I had it all figured out to, oh shoot, what am I going to do now? That started the first sabbatical that I ever had in my life, where I had 3 months of skateboarding every day. And, you know, not necessarily, it wasn't my first choice, but I took advantage of it. And at that point, we ended up moving from San Diego up to Orange County, which is kind of the halfway point between San Diego and Los Angeles, and rinse, wash, repeat. You know, I got lucky. I found another practice that the numbers checked out this time. And what was interesting, it was not a cosmetic dentistry practice at all. It was a guy who just did like regular dentistry, like crowns and fillings and cleanings. And in my mind, I was like, hey, wait a second. I would have a whole demographic of people that know nothing about this. And I could talk to them about this. And I'm willing to bet some of them are going to say yes. And I'm going to be able to get to do a lot of cosmetic dentistry. Whereas if you bought a cosmetic dentistry practice, well, the teeth are already done. So that was my gamble. That was my calculus. And it ended up working quite well. That I bought that business and I grew it 70% in the first year. And so the thing was like a rocket ship. And all I did differently was ask. And this is an entrepreneurial tip, right? You know, ask and you shall receive. It's a numbers game, right? Like if you're dating and you want to have a date on Friday night, but you only ask out one person during the week, you know, odds are pretty low you get a date. If you ask out 10 people during the week, you'll probably have 3 dates by the end of the week, and you're probably going to get lucky with one of them. It's just a numbers game. It's a filter. And so I was just not afraid to ask people if they had an interest in improving the appearance of their smiles. And most said no, just like selling the raffle tickets, but enough said yes that it moved the needle, that I got to do the kind of dentistry that I wanted to do. You know, you make a lot of money doing that too, because it's an elective cosmetic procedure. So that's why the practice started growing and growing like crazy. So I had that practice for 5 years. And what was interesting is that, you know, it grew each year and I was doing really well. And a few years into it, I started getting the itch. I was like, what's next? You know, like, what's my next challenge? Is this it? This is all I got? And I started thinking about, well, do I open up another office, or, you know, what could I do? And, you know, you talk about, you know, what do they say? Luck is the intersection of opportunity and readiness. And, you know, I think luck's going by people all day long. They just don't have their eyes open to it. Mm-hmm. And my lawyer called me just out of the blue, and he had his hands in practice brokerage as well. And he said, hey, look, I know things are going really well for you, but just something you should know about this. This practice came for sale up in Los Angeles, and it's literally the exact same practice that you bought down in Orange County. Just, you know, as an old guy looking to get out, but, you know, you're in the epicenter of Hollywood, and, you know, I know you used to do that kind of dentistry in New York, and I think that there might be, you know, a way for you to do what you did again if you had any interest. And initially I was like, I don't know. And then I was like, yeah, you know what, you know, like to heck with it. Let's take a look at this thing. And so I went and looked at the practice, and man, I mean, this thing was like a time warp from 1972, you know, like blue carpet, you know, green wallpaper, you know, a crazy old guy who worked there. But, you know, when I started digging deeper into, you know, the core of the business, like location, you know, unmet need of dentistry, you know, because this guy had been slowing down a bunch. I'm like, wait a second, this thing could be a real gold mine, similar to what I already did. So, you know, I talked to my wife about it, and, you know, fortunately she was very supportive of me. And so the guy that I bought my practice from in Orange County, he actually ended up becoming a practice broker. And I told him, and he was like, you know what, I think you should go for it. And he helped me find a buyer for my office down there. And, within a couple months, I left and I started over again. And people thought I was freaking nuts. They're like, you're going to sell this practice. You spent 5 years building. Your margins are tremendous. You've already de-risked your whole life, right? Like you got a house, everything. And now you're going to, put your eggs in one basket up here, this unknown. What if it doesn't work or you can't turn the thing around? And in my mind, see, a lot of people think risk is a bad word, but I looked at risk as, hey, wait a second. If the worst thing that can happen is I end up having to start over, fine, I'll start over. I just didn't, because they can't take away what you know in your head and what your hands can do. So, the risk, you could look at it as high risk, low risk, or calculated risk. And, it was a haul starting over again because I took a huge pay cut doing it, and it was going to take a longer time because I had to, I knew it was going to take at least a few years, right? Because I'm a nobody in this community, and it's going to take a while to get my name out there and turn the place around. But it did, and it didn't happen overnight. It took several years to do so. And from a location perspective, being in Los Angeles, odds are you're going to get someone from entertainment because that's such a huge portion of the economy there. And that's what happened. And like the first celebrity person that I ever got was someone who was trying out as an extra for a mermaid in Pirates of the Caribbean. So, but what you do is you do a good job on that one. And you hope that you get the referral for a friend or a family member, until finally you get to the point where someone from the C list makes it in. And then, it might take another year or two to get someone from B, but finally you crack A. And that's the hardest part was getting to that. But, once I did, I'd done enough of the right things and leading from the position of really trying to take care of people, because what I do is so relationship based that's what helped growing word of mouth and getting the referrals. I'm at this point now in my career, because I'm 25 years in, where if a younger dental student comes in to watch me, and I've always been pretty good about that because of the opportunity that was afforded to me, was, how'd you make this all happen? And I'm like, well, it was an overnight success. It only took 25 years. It's not, people don't see that aspect of entrepreneurship.
Yep.
And, but that's essentially what happened. It was not a sexy recipe by any stretch of the imagination. It was just this undying belief, if I was willing to put in the work, that the odds were pretty good that something would happen.
Jeez. I mean, just hearing you talk is absolutely amazing. It's impressive. I love the journey. I love the continuous resilience and the continuous push for more. And to unpack some of that for the audience, guys, obviously this is an incredible journey. And what I'm hearing is never give up. What I'm hearing is always believe in yourself. What I'm hearing is block out the noise and focus on the signal of what what is right. I mean, talk about, a guy here moves across the country, going to buy a practice in La Jolla, the last day of closing or leading up to the last day of closing, finds out the numbers are crooked, right? Or cooked. And he's dealing with the crook. Like, what if that transaction had closed? Talk about a different life path, right? There would have been a completely different path there. So I think one of the great lessons here is make sure you have great people on your team. That CPA was a life changer. And some people may look at a CPA like, oh, they're expensive. I don't want to hire them. I don't want to bring them in. Talk about having a great team that's got your back, right? And so that's something that's super important that I think a lot of entrepreneurs and business owners in life, they try to cut some corners. And it's okay to look at your expenses and keep costs down and make sure to run your practice lean, right? I'm a big fan of that. But I'm a big fan of hiring expertise. And I'm a big fan of believing in yourself and taking advice from people that have been there. So the fact that, Dr. Jon here decided, you know what, let's back out. He could have pressured the CPA. Hey, look at it again, backed out. And then went on a 3-month sabbatical. Obviously, you'd have some savings. You had, you didn't even talk about that, but I'm sure working at the practice in New York, you had built up some savings to give you some
Nope.
reserves to go throughout this journey. No? Okay.
I was on fumes, man. Because my compensation at working at the other practice was very modest. And and that was part of my getting in there. I said, look, I'll pay with blood, sweat, and tears. I don't expect to make much money. Just let me have this opportunity. And the only saving grace at that point is that my wife worked, and she was supporting both of us during that time. Otherwise, I would have had to have just got some random job just to pay the bills during that point in time. So, I had, a little bit of support during that window, and I would have done what I needed to do at that moment. But, during my sabbatical, outside of skateboarding, what I was really doing during that time, because you can't skate 24 hours a day, you go for, 2-3 hours, was trying to find another practice, which was calling accountants, calling business brokers, calling practice management specialists, calling supply reps, trying to get a lead on a new one.
Yep, exactly. Never giving up. I mean, it also, going back to having a great spouse, I think one of the biggest decisions anybody can ever make is make sure to choose the right spouse, right? And spouse that can lift you up, stay behind you, continue to be there. And I think that's very important. In fact, I was watching a YouTube video. Kevin O'Leary was recently interviewed, the Mr. Wonderful, not to get sidetracked, but he went off on a tangent about how important it was to have a great spouse. That's it's one of the most important things you'll ever do in your life. It's for life partners. I mean, that's one example right there, right? Of someone having your back and believing in you and giving you time to find out what exactly works. So you find this amazing practice in Orange County. Sounds like you closed on it, was able to grow up by 70% in the first year. I mean, talk about an untapped patient database, right? You buy a business that has a patient database. It's got a Rolodex of incomes coming in, good receivables coming in. You got good loyal clients coming in, but there's something that they weren't exposed to, and it was the ability to have a conversation of saying, hey, have you ever thought about a new smile? Right. And whatever your process was about that. And like you said, most of them said no, but some said yes, and enough said yes to grow their practice by 70% and to get yourself in a spot to have it for 5 years. I'm sure when you transacted on that business, you made money.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you did well. Some people said you're crazy. What are you doing? But financial success. Then you move down to Hollywood and find another gold mine and are able to build that up. So I want to hear that story a little bit. You go to Hollywood. Everybody says you're crazy. You know that you're like, look, I know what I'm doing. I see something here. I have the vision. I can see what's going through. I'm just going to implement the process, building what I did. And as you started to build up that word of mouth referral, because that's kind of where you ended, that how strong is that word of mouth referral in practice management and altering the physical appearance of somebody's look, right? And enhancing their confidence. That's what they're getting. They're receiving confidence from your form of art.
100%. It's everything. Keep in mind, this was around 2010 where social media, as something, for building influence and spreading the word, it wasn't there yet. Being able to connect with people and get them to refer people that, would want the same kind of treatments was paramount. I've heard this term, it's called the BLTs, it's believe, like, trust. And, those are the types of relationships that you want to form with your clients. What I found very quickly is that, being the new guy in town, I didn't have any friends. And all of a sudden I'm meeting, these really interesting people. And if they can pay for the dentistry, they're generally successful people. And you start to get to know people on a personal level. And, here I am all these years later, my closest friends in my life were people that I met at work, plain and simple. And I had someone tell me once, is it weird being friends with my dentist? And I'm like, well, I don't think so, but it's been such a blessing in that regard. And, as the practice grew slowly, to me, it was just a rinse, wash, repeat of what I did down in Orange County. I was like, okay, it's going to take a minute and I have to be patient. And have you ever heard the saying, ordinary things done consistently yield extraordinary results? So It was about going in and you're doing the dentistry. And one thing about the practice of dentistry is that you're an owner operator. So you don't have the luxury of sitting there working on your business during the workday, because you're in there as an operator doing the procedures. So any changes that you want to make to grow the infrastructure and create better efficiencies and so forth, that's on you. And now you're talking about early mornings, late nights, weekends. And there's a commitment that's required in order to do that. Because if you just show up and do the work and go home, you'll never get any transformative effects with, how this practice and this business is run. And that's the same for many owner operators. We get so doing the revenue generating procedure that if you don't carve out that time to do the things that are going to help you run a better business, then you're not going to grow. And I was willing to put in that time. I had already built that muscle just from my youth. And I mean, even in high school, I worked after school in the evenings, and I worked on the weekends from 6 a.m. till 3 p.m. at the grocery store, pushing shopping carts and bagging groceries. So I had already learned my lessons of this is what it looks like working around the clock. And it was just more of the same, and I wasn't afraid of rolling my sleeves up to do the work. The next pivotal moment that happened, though, was I was about 5 years in, and I started getting the itch. I was like, okay, the practice is doing better, and what else is there? And what I realized is, if I gave all my dental work away for free, I still couldn't treat everybody, right? There's just one of me. And then I started thinking about wow, I've been very blessed to become Dr. Fancy Pants, but what about the folks who can't afford it? And what if there was a way to develop a product or service at scale that could address, number one, cost, because no one ever wants to talk about that dentistry is expensive, and it is. And number two, access to care. And when I say access to care, I'm not talking about because there isn't a dentist, on your block. What I'm talking about is, as a business owner, I started thinking about how does someone come and see me at noon on a Tuesday? You think about you got to carve, as a patient, you got to carve a lot of time out of your life, because you got to commute to the office, the length of the appointment, and commute back to wherever you were. And if that person's working, that's costing them time and money too. So, that was the leading question. And, what happened was that, another twist of fate in my life, a client of mine who started out as an acquaintance, who ended up becoming a friend, who ended up becoming a client, through the persistence of my neighbor, who was a client of mine, just a single lady that lived down the street. And she's like, you really need to meet this guy. And she would not let up. She's like, you guys are, same age, you got kids, you'll be friends. And sometimes you're not of the space of meeting someone else's friend. But she was so persistent. I'm like, I better listen to her on this one. Well, long story short, he took me for a meeting with his best friend and Blake and Scott, and they had an idea around a dental product and service, and they just wanted to soundboard with me. And I sat down and I listened, and I was like, okay, well, I like this, so yes, 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 no, no, yes, maybe. I'd probably do it like this. And it just dawned upon me immediately to spit out, and I want to be partners with you guys. And they were like, whoa, you think there's some legs to this? I'm like, absolutely. And the idea was to develop a direct-to-consumer clear aligners. So think Invisalign, right? You go to the dentist to get that done, but this was a method in which you could bypass going to a physical dental office to get it. And for the entrepreneurs listening, Invisalign's patent had expired a couple of years earlier, and there were a couple players in the space, starting to do this DTC model. And we thought that there was an opening because the total addressable market was so huge. Mm-hmm. So that started, this journey on, using what I knew already, which was dentistry, to build another business. And I actually skipped a whole chapter, but, I recognize we're on a time frame here, but I had done the same thing on my own with the sonic toothbrush in the couple years prior, just off of a suggestion that someone made while they were getting their teeth cleaned. And I learned a lot doing this by myself about supply chain and customer service and fulfillment and product development and shipping and returns and all this stuff, like things I knew nothing about, that I just had to figure out with a Google search. And, and you have successes and failures along the way, but you're building a muscle that you didn't have previously. So when I moved on to the next business, which this company was called Byte, BYTE, I had already developed some of the skills that I needed on the product development and business development side that I didn't previously have. You see, things lead to things. And, we started this company and it took us a year to get to market. And then once we launched, we spent 2 years in the marketplace. And because we were small and nimble, it allowed us to react to market conditions and pivot and try things. And one of the things that I brought to the table as the chief cosmetic dentist of the organization was developing brand awareness, and which was everything, right? Because now we're in the era of online and brand, and having my Dr. Fancy Pants credentials really helped with the trust and credibility aspect of the product. And I was able to work with several of my celebrity clients through philanthropic efforts that they were part of, to give oral care to people who were most vulnerable and needed it most. And in return, you can imagine the traction that it helped, build the brand. And one of the things that I got to do that I was really proud of, Ben Affleck and I went down to the Midnight Mission, and he's had a relationship with that organization for a long time. And we got to do smiles with people who are graduating the sober living program. And these are folks who are trying to reintegrate into society, and they just need to look presentable, right? To go sit in front of someone and get a job. People magazine picked up that story, and that was a lot of, incredible press that we got. And these are, were some of the intangibles that we weren't banking on.
Yeah.
Fast forward to, and this once again is the power of relationships. We started picking up some traction. So, now we're, that's through 2019 and business is growing, and 2020 hits, and everyone can remember what they were doing in March of 2020, when COVID hit, and all of a sudden everything is shut down. My practice is shut down, and we're like, oh my God, what's, the sky's falling. What are we going to do? And we have this business and we have expenses, and we're like, like we're dead, right? Everyone thought the same thing. But here's what happened. During COVID, how do people communicate? Just like you and I are, right? We're using video cams, and people are sitting around and they can't go see me. When you're on video camera, you're looking at your face all day long. And all of a sudden, people start seeing their teeth like they never saw it before, because normally if you're face to face, you don't see your mouth and you don't see your smile. Mm-hmm. And Byte was the solution to that problem. And so our numbers it was the inflection point on that J curve, where we went from like being moderately busy to like, oh my God, there's not enough hours in the day to get this product out for fulfillment. But we had been very disciplined about our cost structure and making sure that these things were profitable and that we had the infrastructure ready that we could handle the load. And the thing just took off like crazy. It was unbelievable. So now fast forward, towards the fall of 2020, and, I'm back at work. This was a heavy lift, man. Let me tell you, because I had to work on this stuff in the morning and in between patients and at night and on the weekends. And during the day, when someone finishes their teeth cleaning with the hygienist, you have to go in to do the checkup, right? Mm-hmm. And usually I try to get in and out quick because I'm getting pulled from a procedure to go and do this. And turns out that the guy in the chair that day was another neighbor of mine, and didn't know him super well. But he's like, hey, John, what are you working on at this point? And the guy's name is Chuck Adams. And at the time, he was an investment banker for Goldman Sachs. He led their healthcare banking group. And I told him about this, and he's like, wow, this is really interesting. He's like, do you have an exit plan? And I said, well, we're kind of thinking about this. And he goes, I'll bet you I could help with this. And it's like, really? I said, well, why don't you talk to my partners, because they're more involved on that side of it. Fast forward to December 31st, 2020, end of the worst year of most people's lives. And Chuck connected seller to buyer to Dentsply Sirona that acquired our company for $1 billion cash.
What's that like?
I mean, I say,
what's that like? It's just, it's a big number.
It was so crazy to unpack. I mean, our run rate between Q3 and Q4 annualized was at $100 million. And to give you an idea, we took this thing from zero to, 100 mil in 2 years. And of being in the marketplace, and we sold for a 10x multiple. It was really, it fundamentally changed my life, right? Because now I have the luxury of practicing because I want to, not because I have to. And, there's so many things that you learn about going through an experience like this. You learn that you're far more capable of greatness than what you'll initially ever anticipate, if you're willing to stay the course. You also realize you can't do these things yourself. You need to surround yourself with team members who are, exceptionally competent in the areas that you're not. I never could have done this by myself. And so to the listeners out there, find people who are smarter than you in the areas that are not your area of expertise. I brought a very specific expertise to this company on the founding team, but I was not the marketing expert, nor was I, the financial engineering wizard of the team. I had partners for that. And just like in my core business, I have an incredible accountant. I have a CFO, I have a lawyer. I have a business coach. I've always tried to be the dumbest guy in the room because that's where the growth happens. The other thing that I learned from this is that, there are times in your life where the going is so hard and you'll always question yourself, is it worth it? Do I have to keep doing it? And that's human nature, this idea that, that maybe bad things are going to happen, but it's just blocking out the noise in your head and pushing through. You have to have a level of conviction that what you're going to do is going to work, and you still might fail, right? But failure is not embraced in American culture. And how it relates back to skateboarding is, when you try a trick, odds are you're not going to land it. And in skateboarding, it's even worse because you're going to get hurt, and you get hurt over and over and over again. And you get back up and you keep trying it until you finally make it. And that's a life lesson. And that's life in general. That's business in general. And so I think there's probably a lot of people who, if they had that level of perseverance, they probably would have been just fine, because, as you know, it's rarely the idea that's the problem. It's the execution of the idea.
Yep. You're absolutely right. I came across an idea that was extraordinary. The product's extraordinary, and the people, they need to execute. There's so many business opportunities out there and businesses that should have succeeded that, it comes down to the people that just for non-execution, right? And what you've done such an incredible job of doing is, for one, putting yourself in the right place at the right time and continuing to build on your journey and your success and your path and saying yes to meetings. You're busy, you're running a practice, you're doing financially well, very well. And your neighbor's like, you got to meet this guy, he's super cool. You could have easily said no. Something in your thought process, something was pulling you to say, just go sit with the guys and see what they have to say. And you had probably no idea what the meeting and conversation.
No clue. Zero. I just like, hey, I like this guy. He's asked a favor, like I wanted, I should try to help him. That was it. There's no ulterior motives going in. And, on top of it, like I have young kids, and, there's a level of sacrifice that comes into all of this too, because, to the younger entrepreneurs, one of the things that I would caution you against is the concept of work-life balance. That is a social media fantasy. It's complete, like there is no balance. There are only choices, and choices have outcomes, and there's good outcomes and there's bad outcomes. But the idea that you're going to work, a few hours a day and then be on a private jet doing all this stuff is just nonsense. It's fantasy land. And I had to make a choice that, because at one point I had 3 companies going at the same time. I had my core business, I had Marashi Oral Health, which was my sonic toothbrush, and Byte. I didn't have a lot of free time. Wasn't taking vacations, and my kids were really young at that time. And in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm not going to see a lot of them, but and look, right or wrong, no judgment, but, I made a decision. Well, they're not going to remember. And I want to try to do this thing because I think it's possible, and it's going to provide them with a life that they might not have got otherwise. And it still all could have come crashing down. Right. But that was the choice that I made, because if you're only going to put in an 8-hour day, you're never going to beat the person who's putting in 16 hours a day. It just isn't possible. You won't get the traction. And that was the kind of sacrifice that it required in order to do it.
You're exactly right. Compound the 18 hours or the 16 hours over the 8, right? Compound that over a year and see what happens. Kobe Bryant, made some interesting remarks around that, is just continuously building time on top of your competition, even if that competition's yourself, and putting yourself in a spot to get ahead. And so I completely agree. You're the first guy I've interviewed that has had an exit for $1 billion, by the way. And so I am absolutely honored to have you on and to hear you share your story and to help all the entrepreneurs and listeners out there. And, there's so much to take away from this conversation of the resilience you have, the creativity you have, the ability to say yes and say no, to reinvent yourself, right? You reinvented yourself so many times. And it seems to me like you run in these 5-year crusades. And Juice, you look so great. You're incredibly young, and you've given the world so much. You've helped so many people along that path. And I think that's one of the things I also want to hit home on for the listeners out there, guys, is the more people you service, the more people you serve, the more opportunity you shall receive, right? Talk about Byte. How many customers did Byte have? He was able to connect with Byte because it was direct to consumer. He has people coming into his practice that he connects and change their lives. Those people go and have conversations about their smile. They can see the confidence from within their peers as they navigate life, right? And so it's about helping and serving others and putting yourself in a position, and success comes with that, right? And he's done an incredible job with it. I think the last thing I talk about just for a sec is, I know you lost your fire or you lost your house in the Palisades fire. And that's a big deal. I know you lost a lot of very, important memorabilia. And
yeah, that was, I tell you, it was not the January that I was expecting to have, like so many folks. I was, long story short, I was here at work doing a mouthful of veneers. I didn't know that there was a fire going on, and my family was out of the country. So when I left work that day, I left with just the clothes on my back. And, I wasn't going to abandon a patient during a procedure. And then I was like, well, what am I going to do if I go home anyway? Like, just grab stuff. And then what if I get stuck and I can't get out because, figure that there's got to be a mass evacuation going on. And my office is only 10 minutes from home. But it just seemed risky because there was so much unknown going on at that time. And a friend of mine invited me to stay with him that night, who lived over in Beverly Hills. I was driving over, and I was like, I don't even have underwear. Stop at the mall, go buy clean underwear. I haven't had to do that in a while. But, something like this, it changes you, and it changes you to the core. And, I went from having everything material to it just vanished overnight, right? And I was blessed to have a really nice home and all the material toys that, that one could ever hope for. And next thing I know, I'm in survival mode. And by 8:30 the next morning, I had already signed a lease on an apartment. And, because I needed stability for my family. And the rental market was not ready to receive, 30,000 people coming on at the same time. And the best I could find in that short notice was a 700 square foot apartment, and it was down the street from my office. And it was furnished and month to month and pet friendly, because we had a dog. And so you can imagine, my living accommodations radically changed. And you learn very quickly several things. Number one, you don't need very much at all to get through life. And I've kind of, done a pivot in my thinking, like, hey, look, I still like nice things like the next person, but maybe I don't need as much in terms of quantity. And so my footprint is much smaller these days. And there's something very liberating and empowering about that. And the biggest loss is the loss of the community, because Pacific Palisades was just such a gem, and you miss seeing your friends and neighbors. But we're rebuilding our house and are going to be back. And my neighbors on the street are, and we very much look forward to it. It's beyond tragic of what happened and how it's affected people. You can, life will happen, and life can happen in real big ways for better and worse, but a lot of it is how you respond to it. And we decided as a family a few weeks in, there's going to be no pity party for us. And we just have to, this is the hand that was dealt to us. And as they say in Hollywood, the show must go on.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And it's an absolute tragic thing that took place. And, I think it also takes a strong community to come back even stronger. And, I know that you guys are working hard on that. So shout out and support to everybody that's obviously gone through that experience and was affected by that. So thank you for sharing. And I think that there's a lot of growth from it, right? From material point of perspective, and maybe it happened for a reason to lower the footprint and understand that we can go through life with less. And it's actually, in most cases, less stressful, right?
It is, very much so.
Yeah. And I just went through a recent experience myself. I was in Utah for the past month, and my family and I stayed in a, very modest townhome that we bought. And, I was like, this is just a lot easier than our house that we have in Florida. It's easier to clean. It's easier to maintain. There's no yard. It was a little less stressful. So, for again, I think we'll close it at this, guys. But as you go throughout your entrepreneur journey, and as you continue to build success and you continue to learn and achieve and go through adversity and setbacks and failures and success and wins and, financial gain, I think that you also really need to be cautious of keeping within who you are and understanding that you don't have to expand that footprint, and you don't have to get on social media and compare yourself to others and think that you need to go get the next thing. You can focus on you, and you can focus on building financial wealth over time. Not everybody's going to have $1 billion exit, right? Not everybody's going to go through Jon's path, but what you will is you go through your own path, and you need to make sure that you put yourself in position to be successful and always be ahead and be prepared for what's to come. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. The audience is absolutely going to love this episode and this interview. If people want to connect with you, what's the best place? Where can they find you? Where can they chat with you?
Best spot is on Instagram. Slide into my DMs. My handle is at DRJONMARASHI, just at Dr. Jon Marashi.
Awesome. There you guys have it. I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for tuning in. If you guys found this particular episode valuable, my only ask is you share it. Our entire purpose of these interviews is just to give back, help build up community, help build up entrepreneurship in general, and to put yourself in position to have success. And so if you found this episode valuable, my only ask again, please share it, like it, give us a review. I'd be super grateful for that. Until next time, happy building.